Disclaimer. This content is created based on my unprofessional opinion and analysis of related topics for social communication purposes, to expand our mutual views by discussing and analyzing the matters. The source of information and evidence for this content is social media, which contains facts, rumors, and some other fragments without proof for their authenticity or accuracy. So, please pay special attention. There is no claim on the reliability and confirmation of the conclusions presented here.
Hi everyone, it's Roya. I hope you are doing great. Back to Idaho, but Idaho 5, not Idaho 4. Yes, you heard it correctly. Because I have always believed that in this case, the victims and Brian Koberger have never been against each other. Although they have never been on the same side either, their common opponent has been the prosecution, or the state. As everyone knows, recently this case has had many surprises for us from both sides, especially for the exchanged text messages between DM and BF, and the 911 call after an 8-hour delay. Although this incident has been full of contradictions, lies, manipulations, and many inexplicable matters, the most baffling and incomprehensible part to me has been the extent to which the prosecutors underestimated people's intelligence, especially related to the recently released messages between the surviving roommates. I honestly have no idea what the state was thinking when it put together this text patchwork. I'm genuinely baffled. How is this supposed to help in their favor? What kind of credibility does it even add to their claims? To me, it just feels like an underestimation of people's intelligence, for not only it doesn't confirm the timeline of the incident, as it has been claimed by the MPD, at all, but also it seems to me they have tried to play a very weak mind game with the public. These texts could have been exchanged between them even more than 1 hour or even more after the incident, when the commotion had completely settled and it was safe for DM to go downstairs to Bethany's room. All these patchwork pieces can be related to the conversation after the crime had happened. Why they haven't released their text messages exchanged during the crisis. In fact, one of the most complex and puzzling aspects of this case is the reaction, or rather, the inaction, of the roommate at the moment of the incident was happening. They failed to take the necessary steps to get help, and I believe that understanding this is just as crucial for the public as knowing the motive behind the murder. I think this released item by the state is a blatant backfire to itself. Although there has been a remarkable effort through mainstream media by using some words like chilling moments, or some others to instill a sense of fear and tension that might DM and BF had experienced, at least for me personally. Before these texts were released, I actually imagined them experiencing a much more intense and overwhelming fearful moments. But now the text messages and the 911 call alone are enough to shape my perception of the stance they have taken in this case. According to my extent of knowledge in psychology as a non-expert individual, and as someone who had to pass several credits in psychology as a prerequisite for my major at university, their avoidance to call for help on time and their 8-hour delay to call 911 have specific meaning to me, which I will discuss with you in continuation. Please be mindful. I don't have any claim on being 100% correct, so I welcome and appreciate any qualified person or expert to correct me if I have any misunderstandings in this regard. As I discussed in this video, the incident must have been pre-planned and premeditated for a while before. The killers had prepared every necessary plan, including convincing Kaylee to return to Moscow for that night through Dylan, orchestrating the fight with Ethan at Sigma Chi, intoxicating Maddie in Corner Club, probably by Adam to make her spill any information they needed, and ultimately gathering all 4 students in the murder location to kill them all at the same time. Thus, to me, the 2 surviving roommates must have been aware of the plan and expected it to happen that night. but didn't do anything led me to think as below. Let's use psychological terms that could explain their shocking behaviors at the time. 1. Unconscious complicity. If someone had prior knowledge of an incident but failed to act, they might experience guilt and unconsciously avoid mentioning it to distance themselves from any perceived complicity. This phenomenon is often seen in silent witnesses to crimes, who, even if they had no direct role in the event, feel a psychological sense of responsibility and may hesitate to report it promptly. 2. Guilt-induced suppression is a psychological phenomenon in which individuals subconsciously avoid acknowledging certain information due to feelings of guilt. Psychologists have identified guilt-induced suppression as a common phenomenon in cases where individuals hesitate to report crimes they were indirectly aware of. In this phenomenon, individuals may subconsciously suppress information or avoid telling the full truth due to feelings of guilt or fear of being implicated. They might hesitate to report a crime because acknowledging it could make them feel responsible, even if they were not directly involved. 3. Diffusion of responsibility. This concept explains that when multiple people witness a crime or emergency, each person assumes that someone else will take responsibility. However, when an individual has prior knowledge of the crime, they might hesitate to report it, fearing that doing so could draw them further into the situation. Therefore, I believe DM and BF, due to their knowledge about the plot in advance and knowing that the killers were supposed to settle their score with the victims that night, avoided calling the police, because from one side, they unconsciously felt guilty and tried to hold themselves back, and on the other side, they knew no danger was threatening themselves, and the killer's targets were only those victims. Otherwise, if they weren't aware in advance, in such a situation, naturally a person screams, instead of texting another roommate, or trying to lock the door, or push the bed against it, instead of opening the door 3 times to see what was going on. The time delay to call other students or the police subconsciously could give them a feeling of being absolved of any involvement. Also, the reason that everybody refrained from using the term murdered in talking to the 911 dispatcher about the victims could have been the same subconscious guilt feelings. In the battle between the conscious and the subconscious mind, it's the subconscious mind that ultimately exposes what we are trying to hide or escape from. Now that the topic of the subconscious has come up, I should say that my opinion about this case has been formed to some extent by some of these kind of subconscious revelations by the people of interest of the case. My opinion in which Brian Koberger is not guilty, and the real killers are protected by the university and in farther distant by the state, because they must have acted in the way that ultimately is in favor and to the benefit of the university and the state. Brian has been arrested and accused due to his knowledge about the corruption run within the university and the state. He was framed as the killer not only to prevent him from exposing the corruption, but also to bring the whole situation to a controlled conclusion. In fact, my belief, which I just summarized above, has been formed to some extent by the points that the individuals related to this case have revealed subconsciously and unknowingly. A few of these instances that I managed to catch were found in some interviews with the victims' families. But before addressing them, I want to emphasize on the point that these are only my personal speculations and concept from what I explained just before. So, while I admire Ethan's families for the way they approached and handled the case, given the critical situation they were in, I also want them to understand me as I discuss what I believe to be justice. It should be noted that one of the most important example of these subconscious revelations is the part of Stacy's interview that recently has been completely deleted from social media. In her statements, she repeatedly emphasized that it is a choice. As a mother, she has chosen to protect her children. That raised questions from many people about whom she is protecting her children, because Brian Koberger had already been in jail while she was saying this statement. That determined that she knew that the real killers were on the loose, and Brian was not the murderer. That was the reason this part had been deleted from social media. I also noticed similar concerns in Mr. Chapin's remarks. Overall, it seems that this family possesses more knowledge than others, and because of that, their reactions and approach to this case have been different compared to other families. Their subconscious revelations are crucial enough to cause me to believe it is possible that they even know who the killers are. So, I understand how much they are concerned about their other two children's safety and, consequently, approach the case completely differently. Now, pay attention to another subconscious revelation. The parents were asked what justice looked like for them, and the answer Mr. Chapin provided.
So what does justice look like for you in this?
Oh, I have not been asked that question.
The person who is in jail right now, that it's gonna take care of itself. You know, nothing we can do or say or anything is gonna change what's gonna happen to that individual.
His answer showed me not only he doesn't know him as the killer, or in other words, he knows Brian is innocent, but also he subconsciously is concerned about him, and his answer seems more about comforting and soothing his own conscience, rather than being related to the concept of justice. He is concerned about Brian has been accused to murder. He knows he is not the guy. Therefore, I won't be surprised if it comes to light that they even know who the killers have been. For sure, the reason that made Stacy to say she chose to protect her children as a mother must have been the fact that she knows the killers are on the loose, and it may threaten Ethan's siblings too, at the same university, and by some those frat guys. Please watch one more time to see the battle of the conscious with the subconscious mind, which to me, his concerns indicate he is a conscientious person, and through his answer, he wants to convince himself he can't do anything for him, which is absolutely right. What could they have done? They are conscientious enough when they don't know him as the killer. At least they haven't participated in his court sessions by any excuse, which is admirable. However, many individuals out there in mainstream media, for example, who also know Brian is not the killer, but still act in favor of injustice, or maybe in favor of money. Please watch again.
So what does justice look like for you in this?
Oh, I have not been asked that question.
The person who is in jail right now, that it's gonna take care of itself. You know, nothing we can do or say or anything is gonna change what's gonna happen to that individual.
The Chapins say they will not be at the upcoming trial.
There's nothing there that's going to bring Ethan back. So we decide to take the positive energy and use it somewhere else.
It took one of our kids, right? It just can't sink the rest of our family, and that's how we decided to take it. It's a choice.
Although the university took advantage of the critical circumstances of the Chapin family, in which they felt compelled to choose separate path from other victims' families, which give the university an opportunity to loosen pressure ring around itself and catch its breath. The deliberate engineering behind this separation is evident everywhere.
On Sunday night, that fraternity named Ethan's sister Maisie, right there in the middle, their official sweetheart of Sigma Chi. You can see Ethan's brother Hunter. He's like right behind her to the left with his arm up and around a friend. He's standing there behind his sister. He's also a Sigma Chi member.
The Chapins were at the fraternity for the presentation of the first ever Sigma Chi Ethan Chapin Memorial Scholarship.
It's an endowed scholarship. They raised $125,000, and it is a $5,000 scholarship that will be given to this chapter every year forever.
To be able to give the first Ethan Chapin Memorial Scholarship Award.
The recipient tonight is Hunter. He is receiving the first memorial scholarship of Ethan's, and that's pretty special.
Of course, this engineering is expected yet to be continued. Recently, there have been a couple of short interviews with Stacey Chapin on the internet about her opinion on the defense motion related to the DNA matter, and also about this family attendance in the future trial. Since whatever is said on social media by every content creator is being monitored and analyzed by the state side, and according to them, the state programmers arrange their next moves. Although I don't have as many viewers as other channels have, I don't want to present my opinion on her recent interviews to not let the state's following engineering confuse the public's mind by changing the appearance of the tactics. That's enough for me to say this family knows Brian is not the killer, regardless of what pattern they have to choose to follow moving forward. In fact, all this case has always been engineering by the prosecutors in favor of the state. And I discussed about them in my previous videos. Brian Kohberger has been the state's hostage, and the planted DNA is the state's pressure tool through which either it could gain the defendant's verdict as guilty and the case to be closed at this point, or in case the defense team can prove his innocence. This fabricated and planted item can cast a shadow over the truth of the case and keep the motive and the killers hidden. In other words, Brian's life in exchange to the state's right to control over the case narrative. Therefore, what Ann Taylor is trying to do now is to remove the highest risk for her client, which is every defense attorney's duty to do. Thus, it is her job as a defense attorney to try to remove the danger that the prosecutors threaten her client with, which is the death penalty. Of course, in the cases that the defendant is not being treated as the hostage, when it comes to the compelling evidence presented by the defense team, that would be enough for removing the risk. But in this case, if the judge had suppressed the DNA matters, therefore, the game would have been over. Then the case had to go back to the beginning, and the two key questions, by whom the crime was committed and what the motive was, which are critical red lines for the state. To me, even if any of the victims could manage to cut off a hand or a leg of one of the killers during the fight, still, the prosecutors wouldn't accept this hand or leg as evidence and would stick on the planted knife sheath yet. The prosecution side is merely attempting to pressure the defense into a discreet deal by threatening the defense with the magic knife sheath. In fact, this is far from new. This rule or concealed formula has long been embedded by the state side before. In the past, they used to apply this formula too. The state approach formula has always been the same all along the case, but the only difference has been in the manner they have implemented this formula, considering which phase of judicial procedures they are in. Do you remember once before Brian was transferred to Ada County, Mr. Bill Thompson agreed with the defense team's demand not to let the media be present at the court, that ultimately Mr. Goncalves objected to it? This has been the state's consistent approach to the case from the very beginning until now, and will be to the very end of it. So let me summarize my point this way. The state's golden rule in this case is that under no circumstances should the main criminals and their motive be identified. Therefore, planting the knife sheath with a DNA trace on it follows these two goals in essence. The DNA must either lead to the conviction of Brian Kohberger as the perpetrator, so the case be closed this way, or, if he manages to win the trial, this DNA casts a shadow of a forever doubt lingers over him in relation to this case as a criminal who managed to get away through his defense team's strategies. Therefore, the case be closed this way. In both scenarios, the case will be closed, yet the real perpetrators' identities will never be identified. It is what the prosecutions want. It should be noted that the knife sheath and DNA solution are neither the result of the prosecutor's sharpness nor Brian's foolishness. It has been the only way for the state to resolve its dilemma temporarily. To clarify my point, consider a script or a screenplay. The individuals who create the content for these productions may reach the ending multiple times, only to go back, make necessary changes, refine the narrative to remove any contradictions, and rewrite them as many times as they want, for they can control the narrative as their own fantasy. However, in an actual event like the Idaho 4, where the incident has already happened and has a fixed form out of their control and access, any attempt to alter the narrative creates apparent inconsistencies which could lead to their exposure. If they had injected any false claim other than the DNA agenda, it would have been misfitted and consequently exposed their manipulation. Instead, they went with a final move, trying it all to something related to a kind of murder weapon, not the murder weapon, with a trace of DNA on it, which I discussed before in this video. They used a K-bar knife sheath because all the victims' wounds had been created by sharp tools, and since whatever knife or machete or butcher knife they wanted to choose, they would have problems with their sheaths or covers. Therefore, they used this one. However, I believe this knife sheath has no connection to the murder weapons used in this case at all. Thus, by using this knife sheath and the DNA thing, they wanted to put an end to everything. This way, they could avoid the risk of inconsistency. A knife sheath with a DNA trace on it, at the crime scene, so close to one of the victim's body, and not anywhere else, could put an end to everything with no concerns for more contradictions. This knife sheath conveying DNA acted as a complete and self-sufficient package of evidence, which not only didn't need to be consistent with any part or details of the case, but also allowed the prosecutions to create any details they wanted according to it. Followingly, by taking advantage of the gag order, they managed to shut down any further debate on this self-created evidence and closed off any room for further scrutiny, which caused the story of the K-bar knife sheath left at the crime scene under Maddie's body to become fixed and well-established as a real piece of evidence in the public's mind. This way, they engineered a foolproof setup with no need for any further explanation due to the special status and perceived authority of DNA in the eyes of the general public, particularly non-experts. So, the status of DNA in the non-expert public's mind as the highest form of evidence, infallible and immune to any challenge, lets the state stick to its narrative. As I said before, to me, even if one hand or one leg of one of the killers had been cut off by a victim during her self-defense and left at the crime scene, still the magic knife sheath with DNA trace on it would be considered as the dominant evidence. In my view, while the initial cause of this massacre may have been a dispute among a few students related to substance retaliation or any kind of dealing, further investigations could reveal connections to the state level. I think the murder of the girls must have been done over some substance deals and competition, that the primary supplier of the substances must have been the university under the state's support. Now, if I am correct, and the state is involved in drug matters, in addition to wishing for justice to be served for Brian and the victims, I really want to see where the FBI stands in this case. Is the FBI going to confront and expose the university, MPD, and the state for their corruption, or prefer not to react and remain stoic? Corruption is essentially a form of betrayal. A betrayal from within causes far more damage than a blow from an external enemy. Corruption is the enemy within, an invisible enemy who silently erodes a system from within, whether it is a political structure, a religious institution, a social order, or even a human body. The betrayal and enemy within act in the shadows, and silent. When the human body's cells silently and secretly turn against their own host, bring that body to its knees. I hope that when the probable corruption is revealed, the unacceptable role of the mainstream media is considered. Throughout history, during battles between countries, radio as the dominant social media was used more than just a means of communication. It was used as a weapon of war and a tool of conquest. For invading forces, seizing control of the airwaves was as crucial as capturing territory. It served both as a psychological weapon to weaken the enemy's morale and as a powerful platform to announce victory, solidifying their dominance. In the chaos of war, the voice on the radio could either instill fear or inspire resistance, making it one of the most strategic assets in any conflict. But in cases like Idaho 5, or even in the Delphi case, which are saturated with corruption in my opinion, the mainstream media has been utilized similarly by the enemy within. Well, that was today's video. Thank you for watching, and if you found it useful, please share it.